Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season wins total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our chief medical examiner and senior analyst, Kenneth. Coming up in this episode, we will be examining the Kansas Jayhawks. Kansas finished with a 5-7 record and 4-5 in the Big 12. Head coach Lance Leipold in his fourth season with the Jayhawks, and he has led them to a record of 22-28.
And thanks, Tina, once again for the lead in. And let's get started with the Kansas Jayhawks from the 2024 season. This is the autopsy report. And we start right there with this note about the Kansas Jayhawks from last year. Due to stadium construction there on their campus, this team did not play a true home game in 2024. They played a couple of games in the soccer arena there, the MLS soccer team arena, and then they played the rest of their home games at Arrowhead, the home of the Kansas City Chiefs. So this team did not play a true home game last year. That's very significant for me. So without a true home field advantage, this team was really playing on the road the entire season. Let's start right there with the betting total. This team had a season win total of 8.5 back in the preseason. I don't think that Vegas or the bettors that took that over calculated them not having a true home game into enough of their metrics there. So that's something that I think we were able to take advantage of. And certainly the books laid a bad number there. So you got to be aware of those kind of things. Now, when we look at our composite win total based on our three criteria, we had this team at a win total of 7. So even being a game and a half less than where the betting market was, Kansas still fell short of expectations on that. Now, let's talk about what we'll do on all the podcasts, but I never take for granted that this may be the first podcast that you're listening to. So we talk about 2 key numbers here: your strength of schedule and your strength of record. Your strength of schedule is what you can control. For us, we look at how did we have your opponent's power ranked. And then for your strength of record, we're going to look at how well did your opponents do throughout the rest of their season. So your strength of record, you can't control. Your strength of schedule, you absolutely can control. Let's take a look at the Jayhawks. In the 2024 season, strength of schedule of 0.583, the 8th toughest schedule in college football last year. And when we look at their strength of record, their opponents, 0.697. This was the second best strength of record faced by a team in college football last year. What that means is when you start looking at their opponent's win-loss record, you're going to see a lot of W's for their opponents. That had a lot to do with how this team played throughout the season. So, key takeaway here. Kansas underperformed their expected win total, as we talked about, largely due to defensive struggles and their inability to close out close games against quality opponents. Let's start with the offense. And if I had to sum up this offense in one word, it would be explosive, but very inconsistent. Now, the NCAA average last year for points per game was about 28. This offense averaged 29.7. Total offense, the NCAA averaged about 387. This offense averaged 420. The NCAA average yards per play, 5.8. This offense was at a 7.3. Now, when I talk about explosive offenses, electric offenses, you're going to hear me heap a lot of high praise on this Jayhawk offense. Let's talk about some strengths for this offensive unit. This team was very explosive, had a very elite rushing attack, and their offensive line played extremely well. Only allowed 10 sacks during the regular season last year. Phenomenal work there. Their weaknesses, sometimes this team struggled in key moments to score touchdowns instead of field goals. They struggled at times against elite defenses and had poor performances in close games. Now, as we like to cover here, 68 Power 4 teams when you include the Power 4 conferences and Notre Dame. So we used that number 68 as a baseline. And we want to see how many of the defenses did Kansas face last year that were inside of that top 68. Folks, you're going to be blown away when I give you these numbers here. Outside of their first opponent in Lindenwood, listen to where their opponents ranked on defensive scoring. Illinois, 54th. UNLV, 62nd. West Virginia, 59th. TCU 53rd, Arizona State 24th, Houston 26th, Kansas State 25th, Iowa State 11th, BYU 23rd, Colorado 16th, and Baylor was 49th. Folks, the worst defense that this team faced was UNLV. All of their opponents were inside of that top 68. That is a difficult road when you're talking about how well your offense performed. When we average out their opponents' defensive power ranking, their opponents averaged 36.5. That basically is telling me that you're facing literally a top 40 scoring defense week in and week out. Now, let's give the numbers here. Their points per game. We're going to give you their raw numbers and then how they look when we adjust for opponents. This offense averaged, as I mentioned, 29.7 points per game. When we adjust for opponent, that goes up to 33.1. So an additional 3.4 points per game. They're passing 208.8 passing yards per game. When we adjust for opponents, 232 yards per game. So an improvement of 23 yards in their rushing offense, which was phenomenal already at 211 yards rushing per game. When we adjust for opponent, that goes to 234. So an improvement of, again, 23 yards. So their total offense from a raw data standpoint, 420 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, that goes up to 466. So an improvement of 46 yards there. So that's almost half of a football field of an improvement when you adjust for opponent. Now, this team absolutely dynamite as far as ending drives with the score. 55.8% of their drives ended with a touchdown or field goal. When you look at their drives ending with a touchdown, 41% of the time. And on third downs, this team, when we adjust for opponent, 51.6 conversion rate on third downs. I talked about only allowing 10 sacks. That's phenomenal, especially when you think about the average offense in college football last year in the regular season gave up about 24 sacks per game. Our 3 E's, how efficient, how effective, and how explosive was your offense? Folks, this team was top 10 in every one of those categories. The second most effective offense in college football last year. The 9th most explosive offense in college football last year. And the 10th most efficient offense last year. An overall offensive ranking, folks, this was the 5th best offense in college football based on our data. Now, let's flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. Again, using that baseline of 68, how many teams inside of that top 68 that the Kansas Jayhawks defense faced last year? And again, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Get those notifications whenever we have one of the autopsy reports coming to you live and local. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, I'll continue to read these out for you. So how many of those opponents were inside of the top 68? Illinois was 45th. UNLV was 32nd. West Virginia, 36th. TCU was 17th. Arizona State was 28th. Kansas State was 29th. Iowa State was 16th. BYU was 41st. Colorado was 14th. And Baylor was 7th. 10 of their 11 Division I opponents were inside of the top 68. Only Houston was outside of that number. So the Jayhawks faced a very high-powered set of opponents week in and week out. When you average out their opponents' offensive power ranking, 34. You're facing some high-powered offenses as well as some of the defenses your offense went up against. All right, let's give out the numbers here for their defense. Points per game. Metrically, they were at 26 points per game. When we adjust for opponent, that goes down to 20.7, a 5.3 point per game improvement. When we look at their pass defense, 239.1, when we adjust that for opponents, that goes down to 219.5, so almost a 20-yard per game improvement. Rushing numbers about the same. 153.5. When we'll adjust it, it goes to 150.5. So 3-yard improvement. Total offense goes from 392 down to 370. So about a little over 20-yard difference there for their defense. As far as their opponents ending drives with scoring, field goal or touchdown, 36.7% of the time. Their opponents' drives ending with a touchdown, 24.7%. And third down conversion, their opponents did have a lot of success converting third downs at 40% there. So that was an opportunity there. This team was just a tick above average as far as generating sacks, about 25 sacks during the regular season. However, their opponents absolutely had a lot of success on fourth down, 11 out of 18. So if I had to bullet point this defense, I would say it was below average. Now, some of the strengths, I talked about it, a solid pass rush and limited opponents' rushing explosiveness. Their weakness, I just mentioned, struggled on third down. We saw some inconsistencies with the pass defense and gave up far too many big plays there. Now, let's talk about the 3 E's here for their defense. I'm sorry, this defense forced 17 turnovers. Same thing, their offense committed 17 turnovers. So no plus turnover differential there for the Jayhawks there. Now let's talk about the 3 E's for their defense. As far as effectiveness defensively, they were 95th. As far as giving up explosive plays, 78th. And as far as efficiency on defense, they were 60th. This defense wound up being the 77th best defense for us in college football last year. Now, let's move on to the special coaching and special teams. One score games. This team was 1-5 last year. Had a tough time closing out very close contested games there. This team also struggled against quality opponents. When I look at their record against quality opponents, they were 3-6 last year. Now, discipline was not an issue for this team. Only committed 4.7 penalties per game. Only about 40 yards in penalties per game. All right, now let's get to how did this offense look in the games that they won compared to the games that they lost. So 5 wins last year in the regular season. This offense was scoring 37.8 points per game. Looks like about 220 passing yards per game, 10.4 yards per pass attempt, a whopping 16.2 yards per completion. This team was also running the ball, running the ball, about 43 rushing attempts, 238 yards rushing per game, 5.6 yards per carry, 7.2 yards per play, averaging about 458 yards of total offense. This team only committed 3 turnovers when they won. Bear that in mind when I talk about how they look when they lost. In their 7 losses, this offense took a major step back, only scoring about 24 points per game, passing down just a tick to about 201 yards per game, 7 yards per pass attempt, 13 yards per pass completion. Rushing took also a step back, only 35 rushing attempts in their losses, 192 yards per game on the ground, 5.4 yards per rushing attempt. That total offense goes down to 393, 6.2 yards per play. But here's the big whopper here. 14 turnovers in those 7 losses. So what's the difference in how this offense performed in their wins versus their losses? They were averaging about 14 more points per game, about, let's call it 19 more yards passing per game. But here's what I'm noticing. 3.3 yards per pass attempt difference and 3.1 yards per pass completion. They were averaging about 7 more rushing attempts and 46 more yards rushing per game. Those turnovers were costly for this team last year. Now, let's take a look at how did the defense perform. In the 5 games that they won, this defense was allowing just 17.4 points per game. Opponents were throwing the ball for about 241 yards per game, 7.5 yards per attempt, 11.6 yards per completion. Their opponents were only attempting 26 rushing attempts per game. Keep that in mind here in just a moment. 91 yards per game is what this defense was surrendering, 3.5 yards per attempt. In those 5 wins, this defense forced 8 turnovers. Now, in the 7 games that they lost, this defense was giving up 32 points per game. Opponents were attempting about, let's call it 3.5 fewer pass attempts per game, but the passing yards per game only went down slightly, down to 338. 8.3 yards per attempt. Yards per completion goes up to 13.5. Now, here's the big one. Their opponents go from rushing 26 times per game to 40 times per game. And that rushing yards goes from 91 yards per game in their wins to 198 yards per game in their losses, 4.9 yards per rushing attempt. In those 7 losses, they only forced 9 turnovers. So the difference in this defense when they lost compared to when they won, they were giving up 14.7 fewer points per game. They were giving up, let's call it almost 2 yards per completion difference, 14 more rushing attempts per game, and 107 yards fewer in the games that they won versus what they lost. So let's talk about, the special teams and coaching decisions. Lance Leopold, one of the more conservative coaches in college football last year, 116th out of 144 qualifying coaches for as far as going for it on 4th down. Their conversion rate was respectable, 7 out of 12, 58%. Conversely, their defense was leaking like a sieve, giving up a conversion rate of 61% to their opponents. Kansas played too conservatively on 4th downs, missing opportunities to sustain drives. Their special teams, above average. Their field goal percentage was about 80%. And their punting unit was averaging about, let's call it 42 yards per punt attempt. Solid team as far as special teams, just not elite. Okay, what went wrong for this team in 2024? They struggled mightily defensively, both against the run and against the pass. Inability to close out games, as I mentioned, 1 in 5. Way too conservative going for it on 4th down. Let's get to the Jayhawks' final grade before we get to the final verdict. The Kansas Jayhawks will receive a final grade of a C+. The reasons for that, this offense was absolutely electric, both in the run game and the pass game. Limited turnovers. What were their weaknesses? Weaknesses on pass defense and against the run when they were getting beat. way too conservative on fourth down, and struggling in close games. The final verdict: Kansas had an elite offense, but their inability to close out games, struggling in pass defense, and way too conservative from a decision making cost them a bowl berth in 2024. So, what keys and what does this team need to fix in 2025? Let's start right there with being much more improved from a defensive consistency standpoint. This team has absolutely got to play better defense. And the way that you play better defense, your offense getting out to a lead early, forcing those opponents to be a little bit more one-dimensional. Lance Leopold, you had your quarterback, Jalen Daniels, who kind of struggled with some injuries there early on in the season. Here's what I'm going to point out about Daniels. 171 completions, 300 attempts, 57% completion percentage. That's just not going to get it done. 2,454 yards passing, 14 touchdowns, but 12 INTs. You cannot be turning the ball over that much when you're playing in a very competitive conference like the Jayhawks played in the Big 12. They're losing a talented running back to the NFL in one Devin Neal. This running back had 219 rushing attempts, over 1,200 yards rushing, 16 touchdowns, average 5.8 yards per carry. Want to see who steps up to answer the bell for his lost production. Let's go to key number 2. Be more aggressive on fourth down, especially if you're going to be converting at that higher rate. You got to continue to put points on the board, but you also got to make sure that you're forcing your opponent to play keep up with you. And then finally, you got to execute better in close games. Coach Leopold being in 6 close games, only coming away with 1 victory, not good enough. You're a much better coach than that. We need to see that get back on track in 2025. If you improve in these areas, Kansas can absolutely return to bowl eligibility in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.